We're going to go ahead now and start. Let me introduce myself, introduce the company, and kind of give you a little bit of background why we are here today. So thank you for joining us this afternoon for a webinar on how to maximize the forgivable component of the Paycheck Protection Program loan, or PPP. I am Paola. I use by Abbott with Top of Mind. Our public relations firm helps businesses get media exposure, manage their social media channels, develop their digital marketing strategies, and the different things we do to increase, a business client's base. But as a communications company, part of our mission is to provide valuable information to the business community to help business owners succeed. To do so today, we have invited the founders of Baron Strohmenger, a full-service accounting, financial, and consulting firm, to help us understand how to take full advantage of the forgivable aspect of the PPP loan. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A feature on the bottom of the screen, and we will get to those questions after the presentation. We do have a Q&A session. So I would like to introduce you to accountants Carrie Baron and Michael Strohmenger. Michael, I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm killing your last name. My apologies.
It's okay.
Hi, Carrie, Michael. I hope you're doing great today, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. You were great. It is a pleasure to be here. I wanted to say thank you so much to Paola, to her team, and to Top of Mind PR for hosting us. This is actually our second webinar that we've hosted. The first webinar was on all of the stimulus programs that are available out there, and this program is about, okay, so you got your PPP. Well, what do we do to actually have those funds made forgivable? So our firm, Baron Strohmenger, we wanted to do a presentation on this to go through, everything that you need to know in a nutshell. So this will last from 3 to 4. And we have some good material, want to make sure everybody's aware. So we will be going through some slides. All of this is written down. One of the things that was released was a 1-page handout that goes through this material. And we're also going to be going through today Form 3508, which is the forgiveness form, as well as 85 FR 20811, which is the Federal Register that defines what payroll costs are. So all of these forms are available online, and we've gone ahead and given out the 1-page version of this. So I am going to go ahead and get started. Okay. So you should all see my PowerPoint at this point. So the PPP program, which is a program, it's a stimulus program that was set up by Congress in response to COVID. For those of you that watched our first PPP webinar, we went through all of this. It was recorded, so if anyone wants to go back and listen, they're more than welcome. But the PPP disbursements went out in 2 separate waves. Wave 1 was a disbursement of $349 billion. That went away in 2 weeks. The second round of $310 billion went out starting April 27th, and there's today about $130 billion left of PPP funds. So if you still haven't gotten, there are funds still available. So the reason for the webinar today is because of the release of Form 3508. And the reason we care about this is that form is exactly what we need to fill out to have our PPP forgiven. So 2 pieces of this that we care about. One is the PPP loan forgiveness calculation form, and the second one is the PPP Schedule A worksheet. So we're going to be going through all of that today, and at the end we have a Q&A, so anyone's free to ask questions. And then once you're done, the actual form itself is going to be released to the lender, which is to your bank. Okay, so in a nutshell, these are the things that I want to make sure that you're aware of and how you can have those funds forgiven. So thing 1, we need to use the funds correctly. They need to go to specific areas, and we're going to discuss that. Thing 2, very importantly, at least 75% of the forgiven amount has to be spent on what they're calling payroll costs. So I'm going to talk about what is payroll costs. It is not a standard definition, so we'll be going through that. And the funds have to be spent within 8 weeks. There is an alternate option. We'll be going through that as well, but 8 weeks is your standard. And finally, your employee and salary levels have to be maintained. So what's kind of interesting about this is that if you've read any of the literature out there, I'm sure you've been bombarded just like we have, but the House of Representatives actually just passed a bill that would change this threshold of 75 down to 60% of payroll, and the covered period, instead of it being 8 weeks, up to 24 weeks. So this is not a final thing. This is a bill that passed the House. It would have to go through the Senate for the next steps of this to go through. So please stay tuned, and this may be changing. Okay. So what are payroll costs? And when they ask what payroll costs are, they specifically refer to payroll costs on this form. It's the 85 FR 2811, which explains that compensation to employees living in the US can be in the form of salaries, wages, commissions, tips, and also benefit payments like vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave, allowance for separation or dismissal, group healthcare coverage, insurance premiums, and retirement. So these are big, big deals. You really want to make sure that you're aware of what you can get forgiven. And a lot of these are ones that are going to be relevant to a lot of our friends, family, and clients. So let's talk about what this means. So that's the payroll piece of this. The non-payroll piece, which can still be forgiven, is you can spend the funds also on mortgage. And when they say mortgage, they don't mean the principal. They're referring to the interest component only. They can be for rent, so business rent or business lease, so long as it's for that, still okay. And utilities, and they're pretty liberal in what they're considering utilities because they're including things like transportation, phone, internet, of course, also things like the typical electricity, gas, and water. So the big component here that I care about and I want to make sure you're aware of is that these obligations would have had to already be in effect as of February 15th. They can't be brand new obligations. They already existed when we had the outbreak. So, all right, so planning ahead. All right, so we want to make sure you know how much you're able to pay any one person, and there is a cap that we want you to be aware of. The maximum cap is $15,385 per person. Why? Because if you take 100,000, divide that out by 52 weeks, so you know how much it is per week, and then multiply that by 8, you will get exactly $15,385. So that's $100,000 salary prorated over those 8 weeks. That's the max. You also, as I mentioned earlier, you have an option in that 8 weeks. So think about it. Not everybody pays themselves on the same schedule. Some taxpayers pay once a week. Some do payroll bi-weekly or monthly or quarterly. So because of that, they came out with this alternate option on the 8-week covered period, which would be 8 weeks from the first day of the pay period after the funds were received, or it's the standard is 8 weeks from the day the funds are received or the loan origination date. Some other interesting things that were just released: bonuses and hazard pay are eligible for forgiveness, which is a big deal. If you have an employee, I mean, imagine somebody working at Publix and they are now exposed potentially where we would maybe say, well, your normal pay is $9 an hour. We're going to go ahead and jump you up to $11 an hour because of the hazard. That would still count and that would still be eligible for forgiveness. Payments to furloughed employees, the same way, that also is eligible for forgiveness. So good to know. Okay, so one of the other criteria that we've gotten a lot of questions on is what does it take to maintain your employee and salary levels? So the big key here is that they're going to do a test where the general rule is they're going to compare what your February 15th looked like compared to your June 30th. So they're looking for the number of employees and for the average pay. So they want it to be consistent over the time period so that your loan forgiveness portion is not reduced. And some pointers I wanted to talk about to help out with that forgiveness. Well, thing one, there is something that you can do to help out with that. And if it turns out that you put in writing that you're going to, that you're going to extend a job offer and it's rejected during that covered period, that 8-week period, then there would be no penalty. And in addition, if there are extenuating circumstances of some type where potentially it's termination with cause, if someone resigned, if the employee themselves is the one that requested their hours be reduced, well, in that case, you're not going to be penalized. So something we want to make sure you know in advance. Okay. This last slide is an overview of the PPP program. So some of the things that I talked about, just nice and pretty in a nutshell, you're going to see that this is at a fixed rate of 1%. You've got no payments due for the first 6 months, and the loan itself is over a 2-year period. So remember, for as of right now, and this may change if the Senate passes this bill, but for right now, if you're able to maintain that 75% of your PPP funds were put towards what they're calling payroll costs, which remember I listed out health insurance, retirement, all these different things that they're calling payroll costs, and 25% goes into those other categories, the mortgage interest, all those other ones, then 100% of that loan will be forgiven. So we are available, my business partner and myself, to assist with any questions on PPP loans and forgiveness. Our contact information is listed below. The 450 is my cell, the 484 is Michael's cell, and at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Paula.
Great, thank you so much. That was an awesome presentation. So now we're going to take questions. Michael, I'm going to give you the floor just in a second to go ahead and answer the questions that the audience have. Let me start with one question that somebody sent us prior to the webinar today. So this is what the person is saying. I can reduce my employees' pay by 25% and still be within the guidelines of the loan forgiveness. So if my employees receive full pay for 4 paychecks and then the 5th paycheck, they didn't receive a check, would that be considered a 20% reduction and still abide by the guidelines for forgiveness, or does it need to be 25% reduction per paycheck?
The SBA doesn't really care how you make those payments. On the form that you have to fill out in order to get forgiveness, all they want to know is how much you paid those people over the 8-week period. As long as it's less than the $15,385, you can reduce it however you want, if you want to reduce it up to 25%.
Awesome. And I just want to remind everybody that we have the Q&A feature on the bottom of the site, the website. So go ahead and click there and we'll get your questions right away. So somebody else is asking, when I apply for the PPP loan, the pay to individual 1099 contractors were included as forgivable money. Since then, the rules have changed. My grandfather in since the rules changed after I had applied and received the funding.
That's a really good question. Our understanding is that you would not be grandfathered in because the form that they've released does not say one way or the other anything about contractors. And the SBA has come out multiple times and said specifically that the contractors were the ones themselves that should have applied for the PPP for themselves.
Got it. Somebody's asking, can I hire an accountant to fill out the form required to make the loan forgivable, or that's not allowed?
It is allowed. It's kind of complicated on how it works. However, we can advise you in any way possible, and making sure that you fill out the form correctly. The form is not that difficult, in my opinion, but I understand a lot of people don't like filling out forms, so we can definitely assist in doing that.
So I don't know if you can tell us about, once we submit the application, if there's something wrong, would the bank come back to us? I mean,
yeah, the bank is going to, just like through the normal application process for the loans, if there's an issue with the documentation upon requesting forgiveness, the bank will come back to you unless you just have a really bad bank.
And there's a list. If you guys take a look at the documentation that's already out there, this 3508 form, I really want you to take a look at this because all of this information is available today. You can Google this. And when it talks about what documentation you need, what this looks like, look at the back of the form. It's not that long. And there's a section here towards the front called PPP Schedule A that lists out payroll and tells you what forms you would need, what dates we're looking at, the non-payroll. So if you see it yourself and you know exactly what you need to fill out to have it forgiven, you will feel a lot more comfortable ahead of time knowing exactly how this works, and it will spell out everything that we discussed today.
Do I pay taxes? Somebody's asking, do I pay taxes on the forgiven amounts?
No, that's specifically excluded. The only you would, and you wouldn't necessarily have to pay taxes on the loan portion because that's considered a loan if you don't get 100% forgiven. So you would pay 1% interest on the portion that was not forgiven if that happens.
Which is particularly interesting because cancellation of debt normally is taxable. In this case, it is not. Very cool.
Excellent. Okay, here we have what you already said. Somebody's asking, what documents do I need to present to the bank? You said there is a list there. Is there anything you want to add in terms of what we need to pay attention to those documents that may be tricky or not?
Specifically, they're going to want to see what your payroll records look like. That's going to be the #1 thing that they're going to ask for. Is going to want for your payrolls, your 940, your 941s, those types of things. Additionally, if you don't spend 100% on payroll, you make use of that 20%, 25%, spend it on what you want. They're going to want documentation of what that was spent on and how it was spent and how much. So you'll need canceled checks or wire transfers or what have you, showing specifically how each dollar that you received in a loan was spent.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to just read this really quickly because we've gotten a lot of questions on that. So they're talking about everything from, these are options. So you've got bank account statements if you're with a payroll company and that payroll company is doing those reports for you. More likely than not, you're going to need to show your 941s. That's the most common payroll form we're asked for. And then here's the list that it spells out. Payment receipts, canceled checks, or account statements documenting the amount of any employer contributions to employee health insurance and retirement plans that the borrower included in the forgiveness amount. So those are still okay.
Awesome. Another question, is there new guidance on what qualifies as transportation expense?
Generally, transportation expense would be considered either reimbursements for employees that you're getting the 55 cents per mile, or if you pay for, say, your public transportation for your employees. Those are the typical things that would be considered transportation expense.
Got it. All payroll taxes are applicable in the salary distribution? Yes, the federal payroll taxes are not included. You cannot include that as part of your PPP loan forgiveness program. But if you have any state or local taxes that you pay on the payroll, those would be forgiven. Okay, somebody's saying, but Michael, you would pay your 941 payroll tax out of pocket, not part of the loan monies.
Well, technically it's coming out of the well, half of the payroll taxes are paid for by the employee and half of them are paid for by the employer. So the employer portion of the payroll taxes would be considered part of the loan, but that would only be on the state and local side, not on the federal side.
Got it.
So your FICA, FUTA, SUTA, those would not be considered, but the ones that you pay for unemployment insurance and things like that in Florida, or if you live in a state that does have withholdings on for payroll, then that level of payroll tax would be included.
Great. I noticed some people are raising their hands. If you could go ahead and just write the questions, we will get to you right away. I promise.
We'll see it faster when you put it on the Q&A than if you text me. I love you guys, but it's very difficult to read my text while we're in this. So please make sure you're putting it here in the chat on the Q&A.
Okay. Is amount paid to owner employee forgivable? So owner employee.
Right. Well, if an owner is a W-2 employee of the company, like you have for S corporations, yes, it's forgivable, but you only a maximum of the 15,385. About 3 days before the 3508 came out, the SBA came out and said that partners of partnerships who were originally not eligible for a PPP, they have said that they now are eligible for it, but they have not provided guidance on how that's going to be forgiven. Because think of it this way: you have two different departments. One's department's working on the forgiveness aspect of it. Other department is deciding, oh, well, let's include partnerships. They're not talking to each other, so at least the current version of the form does not take into consideration partnerships, but they will be included. I estimate, my guess is that each partner would be able to take a distribution of 15,385 max, and that would get forgiven.
I just want to jump in here real quick. One of the things that we mentioned when we did the first webinar on this was that these are things that they are subject to change. I mean, the reality of it is that the SBA has come up with additional guidelines along the way in this. And, I remember when we were originally doing the first webinar, at the time, the interest rate was 0.5%. And then literally that night, they increased the rate to 1%, where, sometimes these things change without notice, without them letting us know ahead of time. So one really big thing, if the Senate passes this bill, these guidelines will change. If the SBA releases additional guidelines, these guidelines may change. But one thing that I did really quickly want to point out, I've been having a lot of questions about articles that look like this. So if anyone has seen any articles that say things like, hey, here's why PPP borrowers don't have to worry about any eligibility or any forgiveness rules. It's kind of an interesting thing because there is a statement that was kind of muddled in on the May 22nd guidelines that came out that says, I'm actually going to read this. It says, the administrator has determined that to be an eligible recipient that is entitled to forgiveness under Section 1106B, the borrower must be an eligible recipient under this section, and rules and guidance available at the time of the borrower's loan application. Why do you care? Why does this matter? Because they're essentially saying that if they're following this, then we're not as concerned about the guidelines that come out after the fact. This is really saying that we're really being held to the standard of the guidelines and what you applied for with the rules as they existed when you did the application. So can we guarantee that things won't change? We cannot. It's very difficult to predict these things. This is a very fluid situation, but I will tell you that a lot of the guidelines that have been put out right now are saying that this is how they're going to hold us to the standard. And so long as you follow those guidelines, you should be okay.
So another question. So somebody saying, since the pandemic, obviously we all have been working from home. Can we deduct our home mortgage and our home rental if they're renting
No,
No.
unfortunately not. This is for specifically for businesses, and your home mortgage or your rent are not considered business expenses, and so they would not be covered. However, the IRS does allow for a home office deduction on your tax return. So if you can then go through on your tax return and potentially deduct the expenses related to your home office on there. But there are rules that you have to follow in order to be able to have a home office. And so you need to really discuss that with your accountant to make sure that you meet those guidelines.
Got it. So somebody's asking, if you offer a job to a furloughed employee and they don't take it, they don't want the job back, and you hire a new person, does this affect the amount of payroll you can be forgiven?
No, it's because they're looking at the number of employees that you had on February 15th and how many employees you have on June 30th. They don't care about what the number is in between, outside of the fact that they want to make sure that you spend the correct amount of money. So imagine whatever you're paying your payroll on February 15th, expand that out for 8 weeks, and then figure out what your payroll for this test period, this 8-week test period is. It needs to be at least 75% of that, and you need to have at least 100% of the employees that you had on February 15th.
Okay, so they don't look at the names, they look at the numbers.
Exactly. They don't care about that. Just want the numbers.
And based on what you just said, somebody's asking, which 8 weeks do we use to calculate the 75%? When does it start and when does it end? The 8-week period.
All right, the 8-week period, there's 3 rules, but really only 2 of them apply unless you're a seasonable company. And the 2 rules are it's either 8 weeks from the day that you receive the funds, or 8 weeks from the day of your first payroll after you receive the funds.
Great. I think you answered this question, but I just want to go ahead and ask you. We had 3 full-times and 2 part-timers that are no longer working with us. We are currently only paying the full-time people. Can I pay a new part-time with this loan?
Yes.
If it goes to the number of
it goes to the number of employees. So technically, in your case, you had 3 full-times and 2 part-times. So you had essentially equivalent of 4 full-time employees. So as long as you have the equivalent of 4 full-time employees on June 30th, you'll be fine.
Okay, if a business owner did not fire any employees from the beginning, maintain the employees during the COVID period, the 8 weeks, that period ends prior to June 30. Can I follow my employees and be 100% forgiven, or do I need to maintain the same FTE count until June 30th?
You have to maintain it until June 30th. You can. I have not seen anything that said that if you furlough all your employees on July 1st, if there's going to be a negative effect.
An FTE, for those that don't speak tax, full-time employees.
So somebody's saying, Juliana is saying, great presentation, Carrie. My question is about utilities can be paid with the funds. I understood that the obligation has to be existing as of February 15th. Does that mean that payment has to be for bills prior to that date, or can I pay my April or May bill?
You can pay your April and May bills with the funds. It's just that you have to make the payment after you receive the loan. Right. So any payments after you receive the loan can go towards the 25% or towards utilities and things like that.
And what I want all of you guys to do, I promise this will be worth your time. If you take a second to download this form, okay, this is the 3508 that's available on Google. You've got the first page that goes through some cool definitions, and it'll talk about the alternate payroll period. So we talked about the 8 weeks, or how it works for someone that's not on weekly payroll. And then the question that was just asked about what counts and when does it qualify, all of that is a beautiful summary was put together that says summary of costs eligible for forgiveness, and it breaks down the payroll costs from the non-payroll costs. And remember, it's okay to have both. It's just that it needs to be 75% payroll and 100% of the loan will be forgiven.
Awesome. So Maria is asking, may I have a copy of the document for this seminar? And I'm thinking, so yeah, the answer is yes. And also maybe can we provide that form, the one that the IRS
Yeah,
just issued?
that'll
So
be
we
no
can
problem.
package all this information for the audience and they have
Yeah.
everything.
I'll do you one better than that. The version that's out there, and for those of you that are kind of used to working with me, you know that I like to look at forms that are colorful and pretty and easy to read. So rather than give you the ugly version that's available on Google, I think I will provide you with the highlighted version so you can see there's little notes on there. There's things that I want you to pay attention to. I put little stars on the important stuff. So I am more than happy to share.
Awesome. I'm sure they're going to appreciate that, Carrie. So if I receive the PP money in one bank, but I spend the payroll expenses out of another bank, is that allowable as long as I have legitimate expenses?
Yeah, it is. They just want to see that, make sure that you spend the money that you receive on the correct things. It's understandable that some people have bank accounts set up specifically for payroll or specific expenses. So it's the documentation that you need to provide to the bank to show that you actually did spend the money on the items that you're saying you want forgiven.
I mean, and if you think about it, if you get PPP funds, these are dollars. So it's essentially you have dollars in a bank account. As soon as you get PPP, you have more dollars in a bank account. So it's not that these specific funds are going to be earmarked. It is not required, but some of our clients have asked us, look, if you would like to set up a business checking account and specifically use that one account for PPP funds to make it crystal clear and very easy, so long as your bank doesn't charge you for that extra checking account, absolutely you can. And even if they do, I just would prefer you go to a bank that doesn't charge you for that. But so long as it's in a separate account, maybe a little bit easier to track. But at the end of the day, you can spend it from one bank, from another bank, and the expenses will be the same. You'll just be able to substantiate them.
Okay, another question. We have no payroll. We were approved a PPP loan based on payments made to independent contractors. If those contractors become employees, would the loan be forgiven?
Yes, if it was because they would be W-2 employees at that time, and then it would be forgiven.
Just keep in mind the 100,000 cap. Over 8 weeks, 15,385.
Okay, if I recall, initially interest on other debt obligations was included as forgivable. Was this removed or changed?
It is. It's the debt that is the interest on debt that's forgivable must be on real property. So, and I saw the question and I just went and checked real quick on the form, and the form specifically states it must be on real property.
Very challenging to go through all of the specific details in this, but I will say you are completely correct. And if you look at the summary on the second to last page of the webinar, you'll see that this little section says rent and utilities and an interest on debt incurred before 2/15/20. So yes, still included. Good question.
Somebody made a comment and says, I applied for PPP, the bank came back and did not use my first quarter 2020 earnings. They only will look at Schedule C, the entire year of the 2019 1099.
Unfortunately, the amount that you could get a loan is based on a full year, unless you were a new business. If you started up in 2019 or you started in 2020, then they would look at alternate evidence. But if you were a business for the full year of 19, unfortunately, that's what you have to look at.
What about parking for employees? I guess, is that an expense that can be
It's
forgiven?
typically considered transportation expense. So I would venture to say yes.
They haven't said no.
How do you handle an employee who made over 100,000 during 2019, but did not resume payroll payment until after the PPP loan was received? How does that play into the February 15th comparison date?
If you haven't made any payroll on February 15, then the payroll that you need to meet is 0. So obviously 75% of your loan needs to be spent on payroll expenses. So you'll meet that number. The full-time employee number you'll have to meet as well. And if you pay a person more than $100,000, let's say they receive $20,000 during this eight-week period, only the first $15,385 is going to be forgiven. The difference would not be forgiven.
Correct. And remember, when we talk about payroll costs, this is all payroll costs, including all their funky definitions of payroll. So the retirement, the health insurance, all of those things that they're counting as payroll is going to be included in there. Really good stuff.
Somebody's asking, payroll costs are the gross salary, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Who does the PPP loan work for employees that are paid on commission? Does the business owner take an average of previous pay weeks and pay their employees the average amount? Does this qualify for the loan forgiveness?
Yes, as long as you don't pay if you pay them more than $15,385, then the $15,385 is going to be forgiven. Anything above that would not be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And all of those are listed right here. So you've got all the different types that you can do: salaries, wages, commissions, and tips still count. Cool.
Somebody's asking if the cell phone reimbursement to employees, if you reimburse your employees a cell phone cost, is that?
I would probably say no. I haven't seen anything specifically one way or the other, but I don't believe that would be considered payroll. I wouldn't consider it payroll.
That may actually, maybe would potentially be considered utilities, because when we look at eligible non-payroll costs, this is the actual SBA form. There's a section that says covered utility payments include electricity, gas, water, transportation. Remember, we talked about telephone. So is it included? It doesn't say not cell phone. So
Yeah.
Try.
I would feel very comfortable trying to get it forgiven. I would definitely include it on my application.
So somebody saying independent contractors can now get PPP. However, I would be paying myself a paycheck versus my company where I hang my license paying me. I get the PPP and now I want to give myself my average weekly salary over an 8-week period. Is that okay? Is there anything I need to watch out for?
Yeah, you're allowed to, as an independent contractor, you're allowed to pay yourself up to $15,385 again. So yeah, you can. And that's one of the reasons why independent contractors are no longer included in the payroll calculation, is because they're allowed to apply for the loan themselves.
Mm-hmm. And this is very, very basic math. So I want you guys to be able to follow this. If we have a cap of a $100,000 salary, right? And we want to know what that is over 52 weeks, then I know that I can pay myself $1,923. Our covered period is 8 weeks. So all I do is I'm going to multiply that out. And guess what? It comes out to $15,384.62, or $15,385. So that's the amount that you can pay out, and you can pay it out in those chunks. Super easy math. And if you need help, we're around.
But should that amount also include the benefits, retirement, and all that you mentioned before?
No, those are separate. I mean, those are payroll costs, but salary is capped at $15,385. The benefits, the retirement, etc., can go over that. So if for instance, retirement is very interesting, because the 3 types that you can pretty much do are defined benefit plans, profit share, and then the employer match to an IRA, 401k, something like that. So if you want to maximize your use of payroll, one of the ways to do that would be to maximize your retirement, because that's the one place where you have the largest area of play in it, especially if you have a defined benefit plan or a profit share, and you know what that number was for last year. So why don't most people wait until the end of the year to actually fund those retirement plans. If you know what your last year number was and you expect that your revenue or your income is going to be same or higher this year, then go ahead and maximize your contribution today. Just make sure you don't over contribute and then at the end of the year, you'll have to make a smaller contribution once you figure out what your catch-up number is going to be.
Awesome. Do we need to? I'm sorry.
Sorry, no worries. What Michael just said is very, very, very significant. And when we were doing the payroll, when I was doing my piece, I went through that section very quickly because I want to keep this very high level and I want this to be very understandable. But when we talk about retirement, there are specifics on what types of retirement plans are going to count. So it's exactly like what Michael said. Defined benefit plans, the match, the profit share portion. Those are the employer costs of it. So that's why that section is included, because those really are payroll costs. It's a huge, huge benefit on top of the $15,385.
Awesome. Do we need to bring to ADP's attention that the money is being used for payroll is from the PPP loan disbursement, so that any difference in payroll tax contribution can be handled properly?
ADP should be handling all that. They should be on the case. Like I said earlier, it doesn't matter which account it comes from. They're just going to have to produce the payroll documents for you that will be provided to the SBA or provided to the banks. Now, ADP and Paychex are huge companies, and so I'm sure they have entire departments that are on top of this to make sure that they reach out, that their customer experience people reach out and find out which one of their clients have PPP and make sure that the correct documentation is provided at the end of the program.
Okay, so somebody's asking
we've gone in and we've helped some clients pull some of these forms from ADP, from Paychex or QuickBooks or whatever it is that you're using. And I would say that many of the programs that exist right now, they do have, PPP has been around for a little bit at this point, so they have a lot of programs that are pre-existing for CARES. It'll say, produce my documentation for PPP. And if that's an option, great. I would start there.
Great. Somebody's asking about full-time employees. Are we comparing the FTE from 215, February 15 to 426 to the 8 weeks of alternative covered payroll dates to determine if there was a reduction? Do we need to restore levels by the end of the day we are using for the calculation?
Yes. What they're going to do is they're going to look at whatever the numbers were on February 15th, and then they're going to look at the numbers on June 30th. And so you want to have 100% FTE on June 30th of whatever that number was on February 15th. The 8 weeks is really for calculating the payroll cost of when you what you can get forgiven. So you either use the 8 weeks from the dates that the loan is provided, or that 8 weeks from the very first payroll that follows after that. So there's two different rules that you have to follow: the full-time employee part and then the payroll part. And they don't really care about what happens in the middle of those two dates. They just want to make sure that whatever was in existence on February 15th exists on June 30th.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to add to that really quickly. If you guys see different information on the dates of that, it's because there are actually options in this one little section. So if you look again at the PPP Schedule A on that forgiveness form, there's under FTE in the back, there's a section that explains that the general rule is to compare February 15th to June 30th. And then there's an alternate rule that'll let you compare the period between January 1st and February 29th. And then there's a third option that is a little complicated, I don't want to get into, that's for seasonal employees. So take some time to look through that general rule, 215 versus 630.
Are the employer tax also included, the employer portion, Social Security and Medicaid?
No, federal payroll taxes are not included. Only state and local payroll taxes are included. Basically what the SBA's or the Congress's stance is that they don't want you paying taxes with taxpayer money. So you're getting free taxpayer money. They don't want you to turn around and pay your taxes with it.
Makes sense.
Okay, what if my business is new and was just getting started at the onset of the coronavirus? Can I have this forgiven if all my employees are new and or 1099s after May, June, or does this only apply to employees and contractors that were previously on the books?
Unfortunately, it only applies to employee. It doesn't matter how many employees you had on the books before. It just matters that your number on June 30th is equal or more than whatever your February 15th one was. And the payroll costs through the 8-week period are at least 75% payroll go towards payroll costs during the 8-week period. Unfortunately, contractors are no longer included since they're able to apply for the loan themselves.
So I'm the owner also and W-2 employee, paying myself through distributions as well as payroll. Are the distribution portion deductible?
No, because it's not considered part of payroll. However, if with the new partnership rules, they may come out and say that they are, but at this point, they're not considered deductible. Whenever SBA comes out with the rules that'll apply to partnerships, they may make like I said, I think what they're going to do is for the partners in a partnership, they're going to allow them to distribute up to $15,385 to each partner.
Okay, so I don't know if that is related to the next question. If a U.S. president owns his shares in a company through a wholly owned C corporation, would monthly distributions to the C corp be forgiven? Of course, up to $15,000, or the eligible distributions need to go to partners that are U.S. individuals? Can we get a copy of the recording of this webinar? Yes. Yes to the last question.
As I said in the last answer, for partnerships in particular, but this should apply to S Corps as well. Right now, distributions are not considered forgivable. But like I said, 3 days before they came out with this form, forgiveness form, is when they said the partnerships are now eligible for having payroll costs, but they did not say at the time how they defined payroll for a partnership. My estimation is that they're going to consider distributions to be considered payroll.
And we get a lot of questions on that also. If you're an S corporation, for a lot of our clients, we do this thing where we do a 4th quarter catch-up payment, right? So we'll have you do distributions all year long, and then in the 4th quarter, we'll go back and we'll reverse it and start calling that officer compensation. So remember, we've got an 8-week rule that we really care about, and we have a 75%, which may change, but a 75% rule as of today that we care about. So if you had that 4th quarter payment last year, maybe for 2020, we plan ahead and we make sure that your payments are within the 8 weeks that you can plan for.
Okay, another question. Can you get PPP funds and SBA loan and get both forgiven?
No, only the PPP program is forgivable. All other SBA loan programs are not forgivable.
Somebody's saying, "Oh, my accountant said no for parking."
Ooh,
and
I love these.
That goes to the interpretation.
Right. Again, I think it comes down to interpretation about whether parking is considered transportation. I mean, getting there and then saying, "Oh, you got to pay for your own parking," that seems a little unreasonable. Now, I would say for monthly parking, yeah, that should be allowed. Whether or not parking on the side of the street when you go to visit a client, whether or not that would be considered transportation, that's probably open to a more liberal interpretation of what you would define parking. But because for that is a business expense, normal business expense, where parking for your employees to be able to park at your business place, that's more of a benefit. that the businesses are allowed to have. So I would consider that more of payroll than in the payroll round versus parking on the side of the street when you visit a client.
I want to jump in on this one also. So if you're going and you're hearing conflicting information out there, I want to make sure that everyone knows that we have all the same information. No accountant has more information than any other accountant. So if they're specifically saying no to that question, what are they saying no based off of? Because everything that the actual literature that was not released by Sally's accounting service, but was actually for real issued by the SBA, it doesn't specify one way or the other. All it says is transportation costs. So I would say that, do we know definitively that it'll count or not count? No, but no other accountant does. And if it says transportation, I would say at the very least, there's a very strong argument to be made that that expense would qualify.
Also, the IRS does have definitions of transportation for business expenses and whether or not they're allowed and whether or not they're considered a benefit or not. I suspect that the IRS or the SBA, if they were put their feet against the fire, they would say they would use the IRS's definition. In the IRS's definition, parking at the place of business would be considered a payroll benefit.
Awesome. Somebody, yeah, Gary's asking, commercial cars covered, please? Car insurance, are those business expenses covered?
That's a good question.
Same answer.
I would say the same answer. It's the same. I would say the same answer. That that is a payroll benefit that some employees do get. If they ultimately do use the IRS's definition, then I would say yeah, that's part of it. But if they decide to come up with their own definition, then I would guess, knowing how they've come out with their regulations so far, they would probably exclude that as a considering it would be an extra benefit to beyond what was intended of the PPP program.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I need to download the 3508 form online and send it to the bank, or will the bank send it to me to fill out, to be filled out?
Well, the bank may send it to you. It just really depends on that case. This really depends on how customer focused the bank is. But yes, you can download the form straight from the SBA website. If you just type in SBA form 3508 in Google or Bing or whatever, it'll take you straight to it.
Right,
Awesome.
Because I want you guys to keep in mind too that when we talk about the PPP, one of the big differences between the EIDL program and the PPP is that the EIDL was coming from the SBA directly. PPP is through an SBA provider bank. That's why you go to your normal bank to be able to get these PPP funds. So there's a lot of banks out there, and at the end of the day, are they all doing this consistently? That's why I very much want to make sure that you can take this into your own hands. Download the form, because regardless of if your bank is going to send this to you or not, if you've seen these forms for yourself and you really are able to see in black and white what you have to fill out, what they're going to ask you, what it takes to be forgivable, you will be more informed. And if and when they do send it to you, you're going to be exactly ready to go.
But that's the form that we are going to share with all your colors on it, right?
Yeah. Yes. If you download the form straight from the SBA website, it's a PDF that you can fill out on your computer. So it's not something where you print it out and then you have to handwrite all of your information in like when you go to your doctor. It's very easy, and you can use your computer, and by typing everything in, you also know that it's legible to the bank and it's more likely to be accepted the first time around.
Okay, somebody is asking, can I use PPP to pay employees during the closing time before I get PPP funds?
No, because the testing period part of the testing period is the 8-week period after you receive the money. So any funds paid before you receive the loan would not be counted.
Okay, somebody's asking a question about Puerto Rico. I understand it may take quite a bit of time to set up payroll in Puerto Rico. Can we make payments to employees during the 8 weeks period but then formalize all filing requirements after the 8-week period ends?
Yeah, because as long as the payroll company is going to detail, as long as you keep good records showing you pay all your employees on certain dates, you have records of the checks going out, and then you provide that to the payroll company so that they make sure that they, when they fill out their forms, they fill out the forms correctly, specifying the specific dates that you made your payments, because there's different rules on the payroll side. There's different rules on when you have to hand over the money to the government. And so you want to make sure that all of that is accurate. But as long as it's documented properly, then yes.
And remember, you've got 6 months to make that first payment. So that would be a good amount of time to get to the documentation.
Also, yeah, you have 6 months from the end of the 8 weeks to make your first payment. So that means you don't have to ask for forgiveness on 8 weeks in one day. You can wait 8 weeks and 6 months before you ask for forgiveness. Or I wouldn't wait the full 6 months, because it may take a bank up to a month to actually process the forgiveness application. But especially considering the number of loans that are out there, the banks are going to be very, very busy trying to get all of this stuff processed. So, I mean, I would recommend the ask for forgiveness earlier than later, because the later you wait, the more time it's probably going to take the process.
And if you're one of our clients, you are probably asking on 8 weeks in one day. Please plan ahead.
Great. In addition to salary as an owner, I pay myself a profit distribution each pay period. Is the distribution amount included as forgivable?
No, it's not considered part of payroll.
Okay, you mentioned that, I'm sorry, Carrie, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. Just the 15,385 is the amount that we want you to keep in mind. Remember, that's the big, big, big number that I want everybody to remember. I mean, the intention was they didn't want anybody to be able to pay themselves a $300,000 salary and have that forgiven. So it's the 100,000 prorated over 8 weeks. That's the max for the salary component.
So you mentioned that there is no penalty for termination with cause, resignations, etc. What documentation would we need to provide to prove payroll went down for these reasons?
The same type of documentation that you would need to show the state's unemployment insurance people that you fired them for cause, and therefore the employee is not eligible for unemployment.
Okay. Go ahead, Michael, sorry.
And so for like furloughed employees and things like that, or if an employee decides to reduce their hours, or if they quit, normally most professional businesses, if you quit your job, the person will give you a resignation letter in your 2 weeks, et cetera, et cetera. That's typical. If they do quit and they don't give you a letter, I would just politely ask them to write a resignation letter for your records, so you can show the bank that they were the ones that quit, that you did not fire them.
Great. And the piece of this that you can take a look at, just so that you can, I really believe in being able to see these things with your own 2 eyes, so you can really see the guidance on that. So if you look at the 3508 form that's available, it's the 4th to last page. There's a whole section on this, and it says FTE reduction exceptions. And there's a whole sections on what you have to put together: the good faith written offer to rehire, the voluntary resignation, the request of their hours. All of that's in there. And again, all accountants have the same information available. So take a look at this, and I'm sure more guidance will be released over time.
Is there a tax benefit placing funds into a defined benefit program rather than using those funds for payroll?
The benefit for a defined benefit plan or a profit share, anything, is that money grows in your retirement tax-free up until the date that it's withdrawn. So, so it's nice. You put $100,000 in today, 30 years later, that $100,000 could be worth $1 million, and then you pay tax on it at that point. So it's an expense for you today on your business, and then it grows tax-free. So you get a benefit on both sides of the transaction. You get an expense for the business today, and then tax-free growth for as long as you go until you retire.
That is an excellent excellent question. And the other piece of this that I want you to think about is that, you know, really what's the tax benefit? Well, if you know that the funds are going to be forgiven and we only allowed to give so much to pay to the salary component. Well, in a perfect world, you're giving that 15,385 as, you know, as many times as you can, but it's only the 15,385. So because a defined benefit counts as one of the retirement plans that would be considered forgivable because it's the employer expense, if you want to have more funds forgiven, which is a huge tax benefit no matter how you spend it, it'd be incredible to be able to max out that 15,385 as much as possible and still get the benefit for the retirement so that all of the would be forgiven as payroll costs.
Right. What if you hire more employees than you reported for the PPP program? Can you get more money?
You can always go back to their bank and say that you've hired additional people. I doubt they'll process the application, but depending on the bank that you go with, you may want to try to amend your application. But that would require you to go through all of the documentation all over again and sign new loan documents, et And since the banks are making money off of this because they're being paid by the SBA, but they're not going to get paid twice for the amendment. So they may not, even if they're allowed to, they may not feel inclined to do this additional work because they're not going to get paid for it.
Right. And just to add to that real quick, this is why we want you to have a good relationship with your banker, because without naming any names at all, I can tell you that, you know, this has happened. And there have been some banks that have given direction to say, listen, you write me an email that says, well, I was in the middle of my PPP application. It got submitted. It wasn't intentional. The real amount that I requested was X. You know, I mean, at this point, PPP is a very new thing. I mean, this is unprecedented. So at the very least, I would tell you, you know, if you try and you contact your bank and they're willing to help you out, great. If not, you tried.
Right. If my covered period starts 4/24 and it goes to 6/18, for the 8 weeks, I pay bi-weekly, but my payroll date is 6/19. Can I include that payroll or should I change my payroll date to 6/18 in order to be forgiven?
I would change it to 6/18 in order for it to be forgiven, or you can use the alternate 8-week period, which starts on the first payroll after you receive the loans. And then in that case, the 6/19 payroll should be included in the 8-week period.
Okay, does a company form in Puerto Rico apply for forgiveness? Can they apply for forgiveness?
Yes, yeah. Any eligible entity that received a PPP loan is allowed to apply for forgiveness.
U.S. Commonwealth.
Great. So somebody is asking here, Walter is asking, if we apply for 15,000 in monthly salaries, and the loan processor offer us only 10,000 monthly, can we reduce salaries to meet 10,000?
Yeah, you can reduce the salaries or you can keep your salaries at the current levels and you're only going to get $10,000 forgiven. So if you don't have the funds to pay more than $10,000, then, you know, reduce your salaries to that amount. If you still want to pay yourself more, you're welcome to pay yourself more. There's no rule that says, like for even the 15,385, there's no rule that says you can't pay yourself $20,000, but you're only going to get 15,385 per employee forgiven.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
What's the deadline to submit the form to the bank? And I think you talk about 6 months or?
They really haven't stated a hard deadline as when the forgiveness is. I mean, there is a 6-month delay from the end of the 8 weeks until you have to start paying back the loan. And like I said, the earlier you file the forgiveness application, the better off you're going to be, because there are, I don't know, 100,000, 200,000 of these loans out there, maybe even more than that. And all these banks are going to have to process these applications for forgiveness and then forward them on to the SBA to be accepted. So there's no telling how long that's going to take. And the later you apply, the later in the line you're going to be to get it forgiven. And if, for instance, if you wait 5 months to apply for forgiveness, provided you're allowed to, you're probably going to end up in that 6-month pay period where you're going to have to start paying off the loan. And then the SBA hasn't said what they're going to do about that. If your forgiveness application has not been processed at the end of the 6 months and you have to start paying, is the SBA going to give you your money back, or is that lost forever? I would assume they're going to give you your money back, but there's no guarantee that they are, because, well, on one hand, it was you're the reason that it didn't get applied for it until 5 months, and so the sooner the better.
I think that was a really good question, if I can just interject really quickly. You know, at the end of the day, even if you do have more time, you know, one of the big reasons that we do these webinars and we wanted to make this timely is that, you know, the last PPP webinar was very intentionally the day before you were allowed to apply at the banks. And I can tell you that the clients of ours that asked us, pretty please to wake up very early and to be ready and available at 7 in the morning, so that as soon as the banks are available, that we're able to help them, you better believe that those clients were the first ones that got their PPP. So even if it ends up that, you know, you do have additional time, why wait? If you attended this webinar, it's because you're proactive. It's because you really wanted to know the right way to spend the funds. So my preference, please do it sooner than later, even if you have additional time.
Thanks, Gary. So next question. To be clear, as a contractor, one can apply and be forgiven for up to the loan amount approved, 50K or 100K. Please state again the documentations that would be required to prove that this amount was paid to oneself as a contractor or as a sole proprietor.
It would be just, you know, for a sole proprietor that doesn't have payroll or anything like that, it would be just copies of checks showing that they were paid to you as part of your self-employment. Mm-hmm. And if you do have payroll, it would be your payroll documentation from ADP, your paychecks, or whoever.
I guess, can I use PPP fund to pay for a new hire? I think you already talked about that.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's entirely the purpose of the program, is to, one, increase hiring, hire new people, and two, to make sure that you keep the employees that you have.
Okay. Somebody's asking, what procedures should we follow to engage you to complete the 3508 form in a timely manner?
Just contact Carrie or myself, and we'll be happy to discuss that with you.
I know you. You can text me.
Clear. I can waive taking my payroll and instead use those funds for the defined benefit program and still qualify for loan forbearance, correct?
Yes. Retirement is considered part of payroll.
Okay.
Certain retirement. Your retirement.
Somebody's saying Congress approved an extension to the 8 weeks requirement.
They have not yet. The Senate is supposed to vote on that next week. McConnell, the head of the Senate, is notorious for not bringing bills to the floor if he doesn't think he's going to pass. So I really do expect the 8-week extension to 24 weeks to pass. And then also the 75% or the 25% to be increased to 40% or 60-40 instead of 75-25. There's no guarantee that it will pass, but McConnell does not like being embarrassed. And so if it's not going to pass, he's not going to bring it to the floor.
But the piece of this we want you to plan ahead for is, you know, listen, if they end up changing any of the rules on this, fine. But for right now, this second, we are planning on the rules as they are today. So no matter what you read out there, it's only the bill that went through the House that passed. Until it passes through the Senate, we are not acting on any of that. So 75%, 8 weeks as of today.
So Martin has 2 questions. The first one is for forgiveness. Are they looking for the number of employees, the total payroll amount, or the social SSN that were on your payroll previously.
They're looking for both. There's two tests. The first one is the number of employees that you have on 215 compared to what number of employees you have on 630. So those two numbers need to be compared, and then they're going to look at how much payroll you had during the 8-week period during the test from the 8 weeks from the date of the loan or the 8 weeks from the first payroll afterwards. And that number, that 8-week number, needs to match whatever your payroll was on 215. So whatever you're paying your employees on during that week of 215, extrapolate that out 8 weeks worth, and it needs to be the number that needs to be during the 8-week period of the PPP loan currently needs to be 75% of that previous number, and the number of employees needs to be 100% or more of the prior number.
Okay, and Martin has another question. Also, as far as employees who are unwilling to work due to COVID, I understand that they are allowed to collect from unemployment, but how do we handle it in order to get forgiveness for PPP?
That's a good question. If it's really comes down to if they're not willing to come to work, I would get them to write you a letter saying that they're not willing to come to work, and so you can document that they basically are rejecting an offer to continue working, and then that should be considered part of your forgiveness application. Alternatively, you could always fire them and rehire someone else. I mean, unemployment is incredibly high right now, so depending on what kind of business you're in, it may be very easy to find a replacement employee.
Right. And Martin, those were two very good questions. I want to make sure that you see that if you look at the actual loan forgiveness form, the first one that you ask, this is the form that you fill out to show the employee. So you can actually see in advance what they ask you on that. And then the second question that you ask, there's specifically a section in this form that goes through the exceptions to the rule. So what happens if the employee wants reduced hours? What happens if the employee does not want to come back to work? There are rules for that.
And what if the total payroll for the 8 weeks is more than the amount received?
Good for you. And good for your employees, but you can only get the amount forgiven. It will be the amount of the loan. You can't get more than that. So, but you know, in these trying times, it's excellent that you have that you're still increasing your business.
You may want to go back to your bank and see if it's at all possible to increase your PPP, because there's still some funds available at 130 billion.
Excellent. And we're wrapping up here. The last question here is, which you pretty much answered, the payroll can be incurred and paid later.
It can be, but it must be paid during the 8-week period. That's the thing that this is important. Only the payroll that is incurred during the 8-week period will be part of the calculation of that 75%. If your payroll is after the 8-week period or before the 8-week period, that would not be included.
Okay, and I believe you answered this. Do independent contractors' salaries, not payroll, apply for forgiveness? And I guess you said.
Yeah, they do. It's just you need to be able to document that you actually paid yourself.
Okay, great. Well,
We
I don't know.
Almost 60 questions.
Well,
that was awesome.
Yeah, very, very helpful. We really thank you so much for your knowledge, sharing your information with us. And for, to the audience, if you have any question, feel free to contact these two geniuses here. As you can see, they have all the answers. And stay tuned for our next webinar. Probably in the 2 weeks or so, we'll come up with another topic of interest. And we are going to send a link to today's video. It was being recorded, and we're going to send you the PowerPoint presentation, Carrie, that you presented, as well as the form that Carrie decorated with her yellow highlights. And then, so you will know what to look for when you apply online. And very much. Well, Carrie, Michael, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. We're very grateful for everyone who is able to attend. For those of you that know us, we've also posted it. Feel free to reach out to us to ask any questions. Thank you to Paula. Thank you to your team. Thank you to Top of Mind PR for hosting our webinar today. We are very grateful to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. See you next time.